Welcome back, and that's the third video on PyAssimilator. In the last video, we talked about repository pattern. We read the user and we also saved the user, but today we're going to work with unit of work. What's the problem with our current code? What's the problem? The problem is that we don't use transactions. What do I mean by that? If we have two users, and we had that specific thing in the last video, so I'm going to have new user and new user too. And if I want to save both users, but let's say that some kind of error happens in between those saves, so 1 divided by 0, what's going to happen is that our code is only going to save the first user. The second user is not going to be saved. So what's the problem here? Let's say that when you create your account, you create two records in the database. You create the first record right here, and then you create the second record for some specific idea. I don't know why we need to create two users, but we just need to do it. If you have a problem in between those saves, if you have a problem in between the first entity save and the second entity save, then what's going to happen is that only the first entity is going to be saved once again. But that's going to lead to inconsistencies in your data, and you don't want that in any kind of world, because inconsistencies lead to problems with your data, with your code, and well, nobody knows how to fix that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that either both of our users are saved or none of the users' entities are saved. Because if both of the users are saved, then that means that no error happened in our code. If none of the users are saved, that means that we tried saving one of the users, but then some kind of error happened and we deleted the first user completely. So how do we do that with repository? We don't do that with repository. And I think you know what's the problem. If you don't, then watch my other videos on database transactions. I'm not going to explain it any further. So if you want to work with transactions, then we don't want to use repository, because repository is a pattern responsible for data interactions, for data management. If we want to use transactions, we want a repository called unit of work. And we want to work with that repository today, unit of work. Different providers have different repositories and different units of works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dependencies file, and here I'm going to create a function called create unit of work. And you can write unit of work, but I found out that that's a really long name. So what I'm going to do is just write UOV, unit of work. And what's it going to return is, of course, unit of work. You once again found out that different providers have different patterns. So if you work with Alchemy, so SQL Alchemy, we're going to have Alchemy repository. If you work with Redis, we're going to have a Redis repository. MongoDB has Mongo repository. Internal, so dictionaries in Python have internal repository. And when we work with units of works, we need to provide the matching repository inside of that unit of work. So let me show you what I mean by that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call internal unit of work. And it's imported from the same thing as our internal database. So internal repository and internal unit of work are in the same module. And here, the only thing that we need to provide is the repository that we're going to work with. So what I'm going to do is just call a function create repository. And how does it work? Unit of work is responsible for transaction management, so internal unit of work as well. Repository is responsible for data interactions, saving data, filtering data, updating or deleting our data. That's it. Now go to main.py and change your create user function from create repository to create unit, so create UOV. Like that. Of course, we have to change our repository to unit of work here, and let's use unit of work abstraction to show our type, show our annotation. And here, of course, we need to rename it to UOV. So what did I change is I renamed my repository in create user to unit of work, create unit of work. Here, unit of work is, well, we use unit of work here, and what we need to do is with UOV and put all the code from your user creation inside of that create user. That's it. Now let's change UOV.repository. That's how you implement transactions. That's the only thing that you're going to work with when you're using unit of work. So what did we do here? Before we used our repository in our create user function, we didn't have any transaction management. So once again, data inconsistencies, problems with our data, or some other kind of issues were very visible in our code. So they happened. But right now, what did we do with unit of work? Every time I want to change my data, I'm going to use with UOV. So I'm going to use that context manager with my unit of work object. Unit of work is going to accept my repository. And the only thing that I'm going to do after that is instead of creating a new repository, I'm going to say UOV, so unit of work dot repository dot save. So unit of work, save my user. Unit of work, save my second user. And if there is some kind of error, so let's say 1 divided by 0 is in between those saves. That means that all of the changes that we've made with create user are going to be discarded. That's it. That's the only thing that's going to happen. If there are no errors, that means that all the things are going to be saved. But in order to save them, we should use UOV commit. UOV commit. So what did we change is that we use our repository pattern from unit of work, because once again, we provide it here. Aside from that, we use UOV commit to save the data. So UOV commit is only called once, and is only called when you want to save your data. So save your changes to your data storage. In our case, our dictionary is only going to be changed once we use UOV commit. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. So let's run our code with debug. And let's see what is our UOV repository session. So I'm going to add it to watches so you can see it on that right side. And you can see UOV repository session is an empty dictionary right now. If I add a new user, it's of course going to change. If I add the second user, it's going to change as well. And then if I go once more, well, it's going to change as well. So our users are saved. But what's the error? Data-aware error. And the error is, multiple results error, because, multiple results error encoded in read user, because we used the same email to filter our users. Let's change that email to, I don't know, Python on Papyrus 2 and Android 2. So now, we don't have any errors in the read user. So the error was that we returned multiple results in repository.get. But right now, if we go to our create user, and let's say 1 divided by 0 is going to happen. If we go to our read user and run our code once again, so let's skip this part. And of course we need to use try, because otherwise our code fails. So let's say we try to create our user. If there is some kind of exception, we just pass it. And in our case, exception is y divided by 0. So what's going to happen is that we're going to try to save the first user, then try to save the second user, and then try to commit. If I run my code, then I'm going to see that read user is going to return an error. An error called not found error. Why is that? Because we used our transactions. What does it mean? That means that the first user was saved, but we didn't call commit. And commit applies the changes to your database, in our case, to that dictionary. We haven't applied the changes yet because we had an error. We had 1 divided by 0. So that means that there are no users in our database. And we can look at that if we just use users filter. So if I just going to use this, I'm going to see that my database is empty. There are no entities in my database. Why is that? Once again, because we use transactions. And that's basically it. If you want to save multiple users, then you want to use transactions. And that's how you use them. Thank you for watching. My name is Andrew, and bye-bye.